Welcome to Musings on the Mysteries, a podcast for deep thinkers and spiritual seekers. Musings on the Mysteries is an honouring and a celebration of the mysteries of life. Discover our two subgroups, A Life with Soul, where you hear how people's life paths have been shaken and transformed by experiences of the spiritual, emotional, sacred and profound, and Dreams, an exploration of nighttime dreams and the themes and insights that they inspire. I'm your host, Georgia Palmer, aka Priestess of the Mysteries, and today I'm talking with Faye from Divinely Soulful about her journey with endometriosis and how it led her to deeper self-awareness and connection with spirituality and the divine feminine. Faye is a writer, energy healer and space holder, specialising in Seichim Healing, Angelic Reiki, women's ceremonies and red tent gatherings. Faye's spiritual remembering began with a diagnosis of endometriosis after many years of uncomfortable and painful digestive and menstrual issues, stress and anxiety. It was through her dedication to heal her womb space that led her back to her spiritual roots, to reconnect with her soul essence and now walk a path of devotion. Through many years of healing and spiritual exploration, Faye finally answered the call to embrace and share her soul gifts and step up to support other women who are experiencing similar pain. Faye also advocates for healthcare equality and diversity, menstrual well-being, the power of the womb space and blood rites, as well as self-love, embracing our divinity, and universal oneness. I hope you enjoy this episode and stick around until the end for our guided meditation. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of Musings of the Mysteries. I'm here with my first guest on the subgroup of A Life with Soul, and this is Faye from Divinely Soulful. Hey Faye, it's so good to have you on. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm really excited about our chat, but I'm a bit nervous as well. This is my first podcast experience.
Yeah, I'm super nervous too. It's really interesting. I feel that even though we're talking to a computer screen right now, that we can have nerves as if we're doing a big speech to everyone.
I know, yeah.
It's kind of this magic as well of this time and the technology that we have, I guess, that we can reach all these audience, but it does mean that we have to come through our own edges of that nervousness. So I'm really excited to talk with you today. I actually don't know Faye, for everyone listening, and so this is our kind of first introduction to each other. So I'm basically coming in as fresh as everyone else at this point. But I'm really excited to hear your story. I feel like there's some resonances between us as well that will be interesting to explore, and I feel that there's a reason that we came on together, which is awesome. I feel it's so beautiful that the divine can guide us to who we're supposed to be connecting with. So with your journey, I guess we can start right at the beginning and give people sort of a lowdown of what it was like for you growing up and anything that feels kind of relevant to go over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So, as I look back now, it's kind of funny because uh, I have a really close family. I'm really close to my mom, I'm close to my brother. Was really close to my maternal grandparents as well. And my mom and my family would often say that you had a good childhood. But when I do look back, I do find that there's numerous areas and spaces of loneliness, not really feeling like where I belong, isolated, quite fearful and scared. My parents divorced when I was about 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was I don't have a relationship with my dad, but at the time growing up with him, looking back, I can see he was I was walking on eggshells all the time, quite unpredictable to be around. And it's through actually with dealing with trying to overcome anxiety in the last sort of 20 years that I think I've seen that it stems from being around an unpredictable parent. But I mean, yeah, very loving home, treated really well. always, was spoiled, had everything I ever really desired, but just had this like part of me that was always missing.
Mm.
And kind of like counter to that, I kind of was always brought around up around the mystical and the spiritual to an extent. So my mum always loved to go to psychics and tarot readings, particularly during the process of divorcing my dad. And I think I was just involved in it all the time. And I think I went to like for a tarot party once and had my first tarot reading. I can't remember how old I was, but I was just like, oh my God, this is just so magic. Like I'm being told I'm going to do this, that, and the other. And I just want to find out more about this. I remember also always being obsessed with Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Bewitched on TV as well. I was desperate to have this teen witch book for my birthday or for Christmas. At the time, there was this magazine. I think it was called like Ms. or Sneak or something as well. And I would just go out every week to get this magazine, and it just had like the spell of the week in it. And I would do these spells in private on my own to like call in like a boyfriend and things like that,
Yeah. I was just going to say, isn't it so interesting how, like, at such a young age, you said that you felt this something was missing, but then there was a part of you that kind of almost knew where that might be lying because you have that drive for something.
Yeah. But it's like that not connection, there's not that not connecting because we're not taught really anything about spirituality or, about witchcraft. It's considered like a fantasy. It's not a real thing. I didn't really understand anything about it. I just knew it was something on the side that always brought me joy. And I'd always walk home and go to this crystal shop on the way home as well. And that was kind of like my I guess my escape from things that were going on at the time at home. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
And your mum, her interest in all the kind of mystical stuff, do you feel like that came from anywhere, or is that something that she just carried within herself?
I'm not really sure. I feel like so my nan was always surrounded by a lot of magic. Now I come from like a practicing to an extent like practicing Church of England family.
Right.
So not like really Christian, but my nan would enjoy going to church. But she wasn't the sort of person that would be like strict about rules and stuff. I think she was looking back now with my understanding of spirituality. I think she was drawn to the Christ consciousness side of things, which is where I feel a lot of my beliefs lie. But again, it's only with like my own exploration that I've come to that. We're not taught that in schools, or it's always shrouded over as if it's like dark and bad.
Mm. Yeah, I think a lot of the schools in this country, I don't know, a lot of the public schools are Church of England schools, aren't they?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
had that too. I had this, growing up, and it was so confusing because it's a myth that we're told, right? The religion as we're a child, and I think I experienced it as
mm,
a story, a myth, and but there were all these things that we had to do, like the assemblies. We had to go over to the church and do all this stuff. And as a child, I don't know. Obviously, it must be different growing up in a family that are like practicing, but for me, it just felt like so separate. I'd be kind of in the church and be like, I knew it was something that we were kind of told to go into, but there was not really much more of a deeper understanding. And I guess as a whole, I find that sometimes that's something that's a little bit missing with the Christianity and the things that
mm,
maybe that we're told about it. And but it sounds really beautiful, like your nan was connected on maybe a deeper level than
yeah,
than most.
yeah. I think like from as far back as I can remember, there was something that didn't resonate with the church, but at the same time, I always felt like there was some higher power or something that I was connected to, but I didn't really have a name for it.
Mm.
And so I was really interested in, I love the idea of like taking Eucharist and having communion
Yeah.
and being confirmed. But there was something that I just always felt hypocritical about the church and the fact that I didn't felt like I need to go to church to kind of connect to the creator or the universe essentially.
Mm.
Um, Compared to my nan, who probably was kind of surrounded with all these different energies, which I've got some interesting stories to tell you about my nan. But she would still enjoy going to church, whereas for me, it just didn't ever feel right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were a child and you were at home, like, was there anything that what would you enjoy doing? And did you feel that, like, I feel like you said about the loneliness, and maybe something was that, for me, I found that I've always been quite introverted. I think now I'm managing to, like, get it out a little bit more, the extrovert side of
Mm.
me. But I used to find a lot of the time as a child I would be playing alone, and I feel that when we are a child, our imagination is really alive and active. And I realize now, being on my spiritual journey now, I feel like if I look back at the way I played when I was a child and the kind of imagination things I built up, I'm like, I was actually sort of innocently connecting on those levels. So did you have experiences of that when you were a child?
Yeah, that's really true actually, because I would say I'm naturally quite introverted as well, and I would often be left out at school. But actually, I'd be quite happy playing on my own. Okay, it used to hurt a bit sometimes when some of the school pupils or the other boys and girls would say something mean. But yeah, I mean, I would write. I was having a clear out actually of our house here. We were clearing out the loft a few weeks ago, and I found one of my old diaries from when I was really young, and I was kind of like trying to write a novel. So I was like writing these kind of like fantasy kind of stories
Mm.
that young. I used to really enjoy writing plays as well. Like I'd try and make like little plays up to myself. So I think yeah, I probably was engaging in something like that back then. Yeah.
So interesting, yeah, how I when I'm pondering, children, and I've got a niece and a nephew, and there are these moments, where I feel like children are quite tuned in naturally, and especially when they go into those quiet times of creativity, especially creativity. And I feel like it's so interesting that as adults we kind of have to relearn a lot of the time to access our creativity. For as a
Mm.
child, it's just like something that free flows, and it feels really like they're so in trust as well of their inner world. I find that, when they're in the imagination, or there's just like, at a certain age, it might change when you get a bit older, but when you're really young, it's like you have this level of like trust in what you're doing, and that it's truth.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen the film Uncle Buck. It's
Uh-huh.
like a Christmas film.
Yeah.
It's always on every Christmas, but it really reminds me of those when Uncle Buck goes to the school when his niece is like apparently they're blaming her, they're being horrible, they're saying the head is saying she's a daydreamer and she's got her
Uh-huh.
head in the clouds, and he gives this amazing speech about like, but she's a child, she should be exploring all this. And I just think that really actually summarizes what you say. It's like I've got a niece actually, and she's just started secondary school. And last time I saw her, she was saying that just before she started secondary school, they had to do this quiz on what you wanted to be when to find out what to be when you grew up. And I'm like, I'm 34 now. I've only just really worked out what I want to do. How does anyone know what they want to do at 11? Like, why are you molding these children so young? Like, they need to explore these things. 100%.
Mm. And so I guess, because a lot of the realizations that you have as you grow up are coming from a retrospective point. So is there anything that you want to cover, in your maybe teenage years, or between being a child and what you're going to talk about as well?
Yeah, I think it's worth just sharing a bit more about my nan. She was never attuned to Reiki, but she always had this. So I was born alongside this little boy called, what was his name? Tom. He unfortunately was born with some disabilities. But I always used to go around to his house with my mom. And I think my nan used to come as well because my mom made friends because they were in the same, basically, they were next to each other in hospital. And my nan always felt like whenever she was with Tom, she used to have this burning sensation as if she wanted to put her hands on him. And the same thing used to happen like we've had a few dogs growing up. Whenever like our dog was ill, she'd always have this feeling like she wanted to get on the floor and put her hands on the dog, but she never really did anything with it.
Mm. Sorry, did she actually do it, or it was just something that she felt that she wanted to do, or did she actually do it?
I don't know whether she ever did. This is the thing. I actually don't know if she ever
Mm.
did. I know with one of the dogs, she had really bad arthritic legs at the time. So she said she always used to be really sad she couldn't get on the floor with him. I don't know if she ever did anything with Tom. Something I need to ask my mum. But I've always grown up with the story of she always wanted to, and we always felt like, well, why did she never do it or pursue it? And then I grew up as well with, there was quite a few ghost stories around my nan. So like she always used to say when, there's one I remember her always telling that she was sharing a room with her mum and dad and siblings at the time. I don't know whether they were on holiday or staying in this place because they'd been bombed in the war because they lived in London. But she said she got woken up and she saw a spirit literally walk through her parents' bed, not her siblings' bed. And so there was just always these weird stories about, I think now I can see my nan must have been like, I think I get a lot of what I do now from my nan because it heightened after she passed away. But yeah, it was kind of that balance of those sort of stories, but my family still kind of like wrapped up a bit in the religious narrative, I guess. There's another really interesting story, actually. One other really, really interesting stories with my nan. This is when I was a teenager, though. There was one year my granddad was really unwell with shingles. And so my whole family were really, really stressed because they weren't sure he was either going to make it or whether he was going to go into hospital. He pulled through and he was fine. But my mum was Christmas shopping with my nan. And I think she said she was shopping in accessories. And she said that the whole shop just went like a blur. She didn't pass out or anything, but the whole shop went like a blur. This man came up to her and put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Everything's going to be all right, Winnie. Everything will be fine." And my nan was just like, that was either a guide or an angel or someone like that. Yeah.
It's so beautiful that you had this kind of positive influence of that sort, for someone to share these things with you as you grow up so that you had an idea of, like, that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
100%.
think a lot of people don't have that, and we have to sort of find our way back to it or, find out about these things, but to have that, yeah, influence, it sounds really beautiful that she as well was managed to find that the middle point between, like you said, the religion and that, and having it still with openness, like holding the religious Christianity, but with that openness to the mystical, which is, again, I think that's quite rare.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So school and everything, I mean, when do you wanna shoot? Do you wanna just jump straight into where you feel you wanna start with your story, and then we can come back to what's necessary? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think again, this is a hindsight thing, but I think what happened as once my parents got divorced, I did have a really good secondary school group of friends. There wasn't so much like loneliness and isolation and such, but I think I kind of went very much into my masculine of overworking, wanting to get perfect grades, going to uni, being the first person from my family to go to uni, wanting to get the perfect job. And I think looking back now, it's partly because I felt like I needed that external validation.
Do you feel that that validation thing was linked to your dad, like you were saying with the eggshells and stuff?
Yeah, I think where I was criticised through school for the school pupils that were quite nasty in primary school, and also from my dad being quite judgmental and critical. Once that my parents divorced, it's almost like, and I kind of was then happy at secondary school. It's like something clicked in me, and I was like, I just have to prove everyone wrong. I have to push myself just to prove that everyone who said all these things to me were wrong. And I kind of went to uni and as most people do with uni, then got kind of like wrapped up in the partying scene quite a bit. Kind of didn't really come out of uni with like actually the grades I really wanted, despite the fact I wanted to go to uni to validate everything. So then I ended up doing a postgrad actually at the London College of Fashion in London. And I think for that, that's when things shifted a bit for me in the sense of was dead set I wanted to do fashion. Fashion was like the mask you can put on to cover everything up. So I just thought it was magic in a sense. It was the wrong magic. But at the time I was like, oh, just, can you put on anything? It's art. You can put on anything. You can be anyone. Why would I not want to be part of that world? And I think I had the dream of like eventually being the editor of like Elle magazine or something. So I really pushed myself hard.
Yeah, I think it's a nice point about the fashion, and I feel that is beautiful, you know, that I I sometimes watch RuPaul, and he has a book, and there's stuff on there that he says about, you know, we're born naked and everything else is drag, and I feel that that's the thing, a beautiful thing about fashion in this positive sense. And I feel that now, even though I don't necessarily wear like, you know, designer stuff at all, I just wear like, you know, cheapo stuff, but it is kind of an expression of your essence, isn't it? And that I feel that we can either use that, like you say, as a mask, or we can use it to get closer to what our essence is. But also, how fun that we can also just put these personas on, as long as it's done, I guess, with understanding and consciousness and mindfulness. But I guess in the industry, that's not always the case.
Yeah, I think definitely like in the last few years I've come to be a more like use of the term of like dressing to embody who you want to be,
Mm,
rather than like at the time I was dressing to be like seen a certain way because I wanted to be accepted.
mm,
Whereas now I dress for myself, not necessarily for other people. And I think as well, like I ended up eventually going in the luxury fashion field. So I worked for Harrods for 4 or 5 years, amongst other places. I mean, that was my dream job at the time.
mhm.
I felt like I accomplished everything, so to speak. And
Yeah.
it was an amazing time, and I would never change my history at all because it has brought me so many areas of growth through the challenges. But I was surrounded by a lot of materialism.
Mhm.
It makes you then question, like, oh, if I don't have that, does that mean I'm not going to be liked, or I'm not going to be accepted or validated? So it was almost like I was trying to get into a situation position to be accepted and validated, but I was actually surrounding myself in a place that was actually making the same things, the same themes, almost worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's such a pivotal thing in our culture, is that most people do want that feeling of, you know, validation, acceptance. Maybe it all comes down to love, but I guess the way that maybe our culture has fed that need, which we all kind of have due to some lack somewhere, the way that we've been fed it is through to gain more stuff and material stuff, which actually doesn't hit the mark at all, isn't it? And that, I think, it becomes such a important thing and powerful thing to realize, when you realize that those things don't really touch what you're really looking for it to touch. But I feel so many people are stuck in that thing of thinking that those things will fill that place. And yeah, I have a deep prayer of that being changed around, and for people to realize that there's more that can be found inside than outside.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, when I look back now, I think I was just purely filling a void.
Mm,
I'd always shop more when I was down, for example. It was literally just a way to fill a void.
mm,
Same way when I'd go out after work and drink, I just wanted to
mm.
kind of like numb out or feel something because I wasn't really happy at the time, despite having the dream career and the dream job that I'd worked so hard for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and did you, I guess at the point, you didn't have a an understanding of what the void was, but was that something that comes in your journey?
Don't think I understood the void until on my spiritual journey kind of more recently. And I think it was when I went on my first actual women's retreats
Mm,
post COVID. So I had done all this exploration in COVID, really felt like I was starting to find myself.
mhm.
And I went to my first retreat in person. It was literally like cracking an egg. The whole retreat was like they were just cracking my shell. And I think then I realized I was so like breaking so many different parts on this retreat. It was like a wild women's retreat. And I think I just went because I was like, I just want to meet people that are like minded in real life. I've done all this exploration online. I just want to meet people in real life, fellow sisters and women who are into the same things as me. And I literally felt like I'd kind of almost been reborn, like I was being cracked open.
Mm.
And I think in that time, it made me realize, I think the biggest 2 or 3 revelations from that retreat was I'd never loved myself. I'd never allowed love in. And I was kind of just empty and lonely, just filling myself up with these things that weren't really, really fulfilling at all.
Yeah, and that obviously continued lifestyle starts to have quite an effect on us. So how was it for you when you're in London now, you're working in Harrods, for Harrods.
Yeah, so it was at this time, actually in London, that I think some of my health problems, I guess, well, my health problems came to like a head. They kind of started to build up just before my job at Harrods, sorry. But they were building up as soon as I moved into London, really. For as long as I can remember in my teen years, I always had digestive issues and painful periods.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think with the digestive issues. I remember, yeah, we went to my mum taking me to some food intolerance person in my teens to see what I was intolerant to. I can't remember if it came back with anything now, but I don't think we followed it. Anyway, there I was. It was like constant bloating, constant nausea, indigestion, painful periods, to the point that I'd feel like I just wanted to faint on like one day or like on the first day or two of my period all the time consistently. And then it kind of got to the point where this had been going on for so long. And I'd been to the doctor 2 or 3 times prior to this, but it wasn't until I was living in London, I was like, I can't deal with this anymore, that I then got recommended to go to a specialist. Firstly, sort out the digestive problems. So I got referred to a gastro, and they did, oh gosh, I think they did like ultrasounds, colonoscopies, all these tests, and they all came back normal. And I was like, but I know something's not right.
Mm.
And so I just happened to ask him by chance. I was like, my mum actually saw this condition on Embarrassing Bodies on TV called endometriosis. Could it actually be related to something like this? And he said, well, I know a really good gynecologist, so I'll refer you to him. And I was actually really lucky and probably quite privileged that actually when I went and saw the gynecologist, he ticked all my boxes and was like, yeah, you are probably likely to have this. We'll
Mm.
book you in for a laparoscopy. But I was kind of like in a place of like living my dream, but kind of having to deal with all this stress simmering under the surface of all my health issues. And I think in about a year, I think there was about like 10 different people who had been plodding me in various different places for that period of time in a non partner sense. So, I mean, I'm still overcoming even now, like the trauma of that time, just because it was really quite full on to try and get to the bottom, excuse the pun, of what was going on.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting how I totally believe that, these medical things are needed and necessary when we have issues, and like you're going to say it's been
Mm.
extremely helpful for you, but I think that there's a lack of understanding of how these procedures affect maybe our energetic body or our nervous system and
Mm.
like the result of that. And I
Mm.
feel not every it would be amazing if these practitioners could be educated in that, because obviously the way that they would then approach the situation might be holding space a little bit more differently. I've heard
Yeah.
from many people, even when you're doing your yearly cervix thing or whatever, the screen, that can be traumatic, and that's something you do often, right? And how different it could be if those spaces were actually contained in a way that, yeah, those other things were encountered for traumatic feelings or, the energetic, the realms of it. And so was the period issues something that you had ever since you started your periods?
Yeah, from what I remember, I'd always had kind of really bad back pain. And I think actually what's really interesting to say here as well, because this kind of ties in with some of my healing journey of endo more recently on the spiritual side of things, is that during that time as well, I was so ashamed of starting my periods. I was so ashamed and embarrassed. I had to get my mum to go and buy sanitary products for me. I was embarrassed to go and change anything in school.
What age were you, if you don't mind me asking, when you started your
I
period?
think I was about like 13 or 14. Yeah, so not super young, but not super old either. I like would have to go in to change my sanitary products. I couldn't look at the blood. No, looking back now, I know that that's just adding to the suppression of the problem. But at the time, obviously, I didn't know that. But I think it's sad because I think so many young girls now are not given that guidance or understanding. It's just one of those things that just hide it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that even the way that periods and stuff are advertised on TV, and it always gives this kind of, I don't know, that it's supposed to be something that's really kept away and hidden, and it might be dirty. And so our journeys kind of overlap a little bit in the sense that I have had similar situations. So I started my periods when I was 9, which was really young. And obviously I had that was a whole story for me, which was like, that's another podcast. But I got diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I actually, one of the main pivotal parts of my process of healing that was going back to that first period and that maiden time of like all the stuff around there and what it means to start your period, and what that means for your sexuality and your femininity. So I think it's such a pivotal point that people who suffer these things go back to those first experiences and what they're told and everything about the periods.
I think definitely in the work, this is what, like, ceremony is one of the things I'm really kind of one of my key interests, because I do think without in the Western society, we just don't mark menarche at all. And I think if we did that, I think women's relationships with their periods would be better. I was in a workshop once and I can't remember specifically the passage. The lady who was leading the workshop she read out a passage from the Bible that was about menstruation. And it was all about, essentially, a top line was something about, if a man went near a woman while she was menstruating, he would be like impure for 7 days or something. And then I'm like, why? How is this? This is why it's feeding into society. I also find it really fascinating that when I did some of my menstrual healing studies, I found out that like menstrual blood contains stem cells and also like key plant fertilizer nutrients. And I was like, that's so much, like, not only are we just like shedding the lining of what's supposed to be there to hold a baby, but there's all this extra nutrients. I think they were saying they were exploring the stem cells in menstrual blood for some healing purpose. I can't remember what it was, but they were investigating whether they could use that in something. And it's like, we just bin it or flush it away or, are embarrassed about it. And it's the most natural thing. It really is.
Yeah, exactly. That text that you were talking about, I've heard the same thing I've read this book, basically sacred prostitutes back in a long time ago. They called them Kadeshas in this book. And I think it's around how that ties in is they talk about the Hasidic Jews in there. And it's from the point of view of a woman who's married, and her husband can't have any like contact with her, or even I think sleep in the same room or anything when she's on the period for that whole week, and maybe even a week after or before. And so how interesting is that it's like, so not only from more recent times, like we say with the adverts, that it's shown in a certain way, but it goes back a long time. And like there's stuff with the Christianity as well. Yeah, it's a big story, and that can carry, I feel like collectively as feminine, that's something that we all carry, and that's, yeah, needs to be sorted out. And I'm so excited that actually it is being addressed in so many circles at the moment. And I feel like you can go into that when you start to talk about your healing. So where were we? We were with, you were having tests done, and so you went to the gynecologist and he can confirm that.
Yeah. So then she had a laparoscopy and they found endometriosis on my bladder, on my uterosacral ligaments, particularly on my left hand side. Oh, we can talk about like the left hand side and how that's symbolic later on. But yeah, particularly on the left hand side. Also in like an area called the pouch of Douglas. So yeah, it wasn't like the most severe. Like I have had it more severe since then, but then that was like the official diagnosis, and it was kind of a bit bittersweet because I was like, had felt relieved that they'd found something, but also you just don't really want it. You don't want anything to be wrong with you.
Mm.
But by this point, I had, even though the tests had been prominent for that like year, I had gone to the doctor 2 or 3 times prior to that, and I think it's important to share this because I know a lot of women go through the same thing. I had been fobbed off for just Archer's IBS, and I'd been fobbed off again with Archer's thrush. I was like, it's really not. And then I was fobbed off again with like STIs, and I was like, I know I don't have an STI. And so what, it took like 5 attempts to get to see a doctor to them actually give me a diagnosis over this kind of a long period of time. And I just think that it's so important to kind of raise awareness that we're in the society and that for some reason women still are not believed. We're kind of still considered neurotic or hysterical. Like I think the word hysterectomy actually comes from the word hysteria.
Oh yeah.
And so there's this idea that years and years ago they would remove women's wombs because that was what was giving them hysteria. And I think that's still really prominent now. I see that in comparison to my brother's health challenges. He has been diagnosed with things and had support so much quicker than I ever did. I know that's one small example,
That's so interesting.
but
You had that comparison always, though. That's, really, in a way, that's like valuable that you can see that that's different, but it's also like such a painful thing that has to happen.
yeah.
And I had the same thing, with my situation with the PCOS. My doctor, dismissed it and just gave me. So basically, what I was experiencing at that point was facial hair growth, like a lot of it. It's funny now because you wouldn't know, but I've had like extensive work done on it. It was, so he kind of just said, "Oh, you've got this thing called hirsutism or something," and he gave me a little brochure that just explained female hair growth. And so I like left it at that. I was like, okay, so maybe that's just something that I have. And then it wasn't until I was at, like, we have like a gynecology clinic that's separate from the doctors, where you can go and have, like, I used to just go for, I go for screening about sexual health. And so one of the doctors, she like literally like called me out on it and was like, "Why have you got this growing?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know." I said, "It just grows." And she was like, "Well, you need to put you into all these blood tests." And so it was only until like a woman who obviously works in the field, and a woman, say, actually, called me out on it. I was ready to admit, or like just ready to take it as like, oh, that's just something that doesn't have any meaning. And so once they actually gave me the blood tests and stuff, then that actually gave me a counter of like, okay, now I know how I can maybe shift this. Otherwise I would have stayed in the same old habits and the same old stuff, because this one guy just told me to walk out, he just sent me out of the doctor's thing with a brochure saying I've got hirsutism. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. From my brother's perspective, it was good that he's always had fast diagnoses. But I mean, my best friend, I don't think she would mind me sharing this, but she has had has had ongoing problems herself, health problems, and she eventually got diagnosed with celiac disease a few years ago. But it's still an ongoing journey. There's still something not right that she's still trying to like figure out with various doctors. But she's had to, end up going paid to go private essentially because she's not getting the answers mainstream because she's just for years hasn't been believed. Although she does live in Canada as well now, so the head of healthcare system slightly different to the UK, but it's almost like healing's a life journey anyway, but it's an extra healing journey on the healing journey.
Yeah, I found it interesting, the thing you said around the hysterectomy and hysteria. I actually didn't ever make that link, and it made me. What it drew up in me was around, as you were speaking, it just came of like, okay, so what's that about? Like, why? What could create this idea of hysteria? And I feel that obviously around our cycle we have different hormones that come at different times, so therefore it will like create different. Sometimes it can feel like a whole different personality, right? And so that's interesting that they say, okay, we take the womb out, the thing that controls those hormones. And I know that you've done a journey with the cycle and kind of coming more into clarity with that, which can also really assist. So yeah, I want to make sure we don't keep going off on tangents, but sort of stay with the journey but flow with what comes up. So you had the diagnosis, and then, so what was your initial like feeling when he finally sort of said like, this is definitely what you've got?
I think, do you know what it was? It's like, this is actually quite funny because I remember he said to me, he said, if the laparoscopy is going to go in a little incision in your pelvis and your belly button. So I knew I'd always going to have like two holes essentially. And he said, but if we find any more, we might have to go in other places. Oh no, hang on, sorry. I was going to have one incision. So if I knew when I came round, if I'd had more, that it would have been they found something. And I remember coming round and I could hear the nurses and the doctors saying, blah, 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 Faye's been diagnosed with endometriosis. And I was like, oh, I have it, I have it. But I was trying to find these incisions on my tummy and I couldn't find them. And I was like debating with them. I was like, but there's nothing on my tummy. And they were like, there really is. You just haven't found them. So I think the first thing I did, it was almost like I was really out of it because I'd just come around from anesthetic. But I was kind of like, before it had sunk in, it was almost like excited that I'd just been believed.
Right.
And I remember going back to the ward where my mom was waiting for me, and I was like, "Mom, I have it, I have it." And I think my mom was shocked that I was kind of like trying to be positive at the time. or I was positive at the time. I was just completely out of it. But that was my first reaction. I think I was just, oh my God, I've finally been believed, I think was the first thing. Yeah. Before it properly sunk in.
Yeah, that must have been like a real relief after all those years.
Yeah.
When you got diagnosed, what was the next steps in the sense? So did you have to go through surgeries to remove some?
So everything I had at that time, they took out, and then I was still on the pill at the time, so they had changed my pill to the progestin only pill because essentially the estrogen, because it's an estrogen dependent disease, the estrogen in some pills can affect it essentially. So they put me on the progestin only pill to suppress the cycle and essentially suppress anything that could regrow back. And then I kind of started changing my diet around a bit. So I went gluten free. I also gave up dairy. I also gave up soya as well. I didn't really eat much soya anyway, but I did give up soya as well because, again, the estrogen. And then I started yoga and also went to physio. And things kind of improved, but not really that much. I still remembered having, I wasn't having periods, but I still remembered having, sitting at my desk trying to write something, and I just still could feel like I was having like stabbing pains in my pelvis, essentially. So I don't remember my pain really reducing much in that time. I had a bit of relief, but not a huge amount.
I'm aware that so some people might not actually know what endometriosis is. So if you want to like explain a little bit about what that means and about the thing around estrogen progesterone, I think is quite important as well.
Yeah, so endometriosis essentially is where the lining that grows in the womb during your like autumn phase, which would be premenstrual phase. It's when this basically all the cells that grow in your line in the womb. It's when those cells are growing elsewhere in the body, so outside the womb space. So they could grow anywhere from on your fallopian tubes to your bowel or colon to your bladder to on top of your womb or around your sacral ligaments. I think I read once that this is very, very rare, but I think endometriosis has actually also been found on the brain and on the lungs. But again, very, very rare. I can't remember the citation of where I read that, but I do remember reading that somewhere. They don't really know the cause of it. There's various explanations as to why. But every explanation also has like a dis-explanation. So again, no one really knows. But one example is retrograde menstruation. So where the cells kind of retrograde out, I think out of the fallopian tubes backwards, maybe, into the pelvis. I think another one is cellular mutation, where the cells elsewhere in your body like mutate into those kind of cells that are found inside the womb. Another theory relates to the immune system, where most people have those cells grow, but we don't have the immune system to flush them out or kill them, essentially. I think people who have like mums and nans who have had the disease are kind of a bit more genetic predisposed to it, just having it as well. Yeah. So they're like completely active and work in the same way the cells in the womb work. So when we go through our menstrual cycle and we're having a period, they will also bleed. And that is why you get extra pain on your period. And then over time as well, as they rebleed, they can form something like called sticky adhesions, where then you're sticking, that's whether you get quite severely and your organs stick together. And then you can also get what you call chocolate cysts, where the blood congregates, like I think on your ovaries, where the blood can't potentially escape. So it can cause quite a mess inside if left.
Mm.
And then, unfortunately, as well, the longer it's left, the symptoms get worse. Like I follow quite a few endometriosis charities, and I do know of girls who eventually have had to have part of their colon removed and have had a stoma put in. And I do also know of, it can eventually cause, if it blocks the fallopian tubes, it can, of course, cause infertility as well in extreme cases.
Yeah. And so did you find it, you said that you felt relieved, but was there also fear when you got diagnosed? I know that when I've had anything that might come up with the womb, there's like a fear that's like, oh my God, about the fertility? And like, did you have a fear that come up about that?
So I think because I was quite young at the time, I was like 25-ish, 26. Fertility wasn't really, I've always wanted children, but it wasn't, I still felt like I had a lot of time. So I don't really, wasn't so concerned about that. I think when we get around to my last operation, which was last year, despite the fact I'd gone through the process twice before, that was like the most severe. And I was now in my 30s. I think that was the one that brought the biggest fear, I think. Yeah.
Mm. So you started your journey with some diet changes and yoga and the progesterone. Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of so with the PCOS, it's also to do with this estrogen or estrogen and progesterone balance, and how from my research with that, I found that our environment is very estrogen creating, in the sense that we have a lot of toxins that somehow for some reason create more of that, like even in petrol and stuff, they say. So the air that we breathe and like the foods that we're eating and everything create that estrogen dominance, which can create a lot of things, also breast lumps and stuff. So that's really interesting that these issues that we're suffering now from in this modern age, maybe more so than in the past, is partly as well maybe our environment. So
Yeah, I think also just on that, I think I remember looking back, I think I tried to also eat more organic actually because of the estrogen in the environment. I didn't drink from plastic bottles anymore, and I also switched up my beauty regime a bit as well. So like I tried to like go for more natural organic beauty products and makeup for the same reason. But I do think like 110%, like I think half of this problem is the toxins in the environment. And I think it goes the same for men's fertility as well, actually.
it's such a shame, there's grief around that for me, that we've created a world that is toxic to us and to our children. And yeah, for me with my journey with the PCOS, it was also to do with that, coming into a toxic world. And then the foods we eat, and I also couldn't have my mum's breast milk, so I got put on soy milk when I was a really young baby. And so often suffer with these feelings of grief when I feel like I'm trying to do my best I can in my life, in the world, this world that we live in, and still there's so much things that are like coming against us at all times. And that how we have to, what we have to do can feel and seem quite strict to most people, but it's like really what we're doing is just combating the stuff that's been put upon us without our consent.
Yeah, I know, 100%. Yeah. I mean, when I visited my best friend in Canada a few years ago, I went into that's the only place actually have been where I haven't had any tummy problems. And the the supermarkets there are just so much more fresher. Everything's kind of like, I mean, I try to go to the local farm shop most of the time where I'm living now. But if you still go to the majority of not farm shops, supermarkets, everything you go for organic food, but it's still covered in plastic, which just doesn't make any sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
So those were the first, I guess, things that you tried, but you said that you were still having some issues at that point.
Yeah. So I think also because I was on the pill at that time, so I didn't have any periods at all. So I felt like I kind of had kind of like it was kind of like flatlined. Everything was suppressed. And it kind of got me through the rest of my time in London, essentially. But I didn't have any kind of like major reduction. I don't think I really had much of a major reduction in pain. I think it's good to know actually that as well with endometriosis that there isn't actually no one knows a specific cure. So I think while a lot of women are offered the pill and things like the coil, and I think as long as every woman makes an informed choice, if that's what they want to do, then that's fine. But it's important to note that I was on that pill at that time. I still had my endometriosis grow back in those 4 years. So it just suppresses it. It doesn't completely, it's not a cure. Same way as, they say, you'll go and get pregnant. Pregnancy is not a cure because people will have a baby and then they'll have endo sometimes grow back. No one really knows the cause of it and no one really knows an actual cure. But there was actually a really interesting study that I saw on the news a few years ago. They were trialing a cancer drug for endometriosis and they had a really good response to it. So I think there's definitely like a cellular thing that with mutation that happens, which kind of ties into what we were just talking about the environment as well. I think I heard something once recently. Um, this is by no this is by no way like me necessarily believing it or thinking it's the same for everyone, because I do have a family member who has also gone through cancer, so I'm aware of the pain it can cause. But I think I read something once, something like that, like sometimes a tumor can be your body's way of pushing out toxins because it's accumulating it in one place because it doesn't know what else to do with it.
Mm. Yeah, I feel that the health journey that I've come on through because of my diagnosis of PCOS and other things, so much about it is that detox, with all these different conditions, is just giving the body that help it needs to be able to remember again how to process something and integrate. And I guess it's just the result of our time that we need to maybe help our body a bit more with that process, because there's like a lot more going in than we're maybe even created to sustain.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of things you can do with endometriosis as well. They often say to take things like that can help support detoxing the liver, because you're helping detoxify the excess estrogen from your body. Because it's not just the fact that you're having it more of it from the environment, but also you might have an excess of it anyway already in your system because it can't be metabolized properly. So yeah, it's just supporting that detoxification process essentially.
Mm. So what you were saying before is that we're not talking about curing something here, we're talking about managing something to the best of our ability, because like you say, there's not necessarily a cure for endometriosis. It might come back, but you can do certain things to help your body be able to, yes, be with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was what you were experiencing when you first had the kind of reoccurrence of it.
Yeah, so I kind of then for the next, I was in London for another 4 years after that. I was a bit more self-aware in my behavior and what I was doing, and obviously, like I said, with my diet and what I was putting on my body and consuming and stuff. And I kind of started getting a bit into holistic healing, but I wasn't kind of like wasn't my main interest. And then got to the 3.5 year period mark, or after the first op, I started waking up some mornings with just horrendous cramps in my pelvis. Really quite to the point I'd have to go and get in the middle of the night like a hot water bottle or something. I was just like, this. It started building up more regularly, and I was like, I don't think this is right. And it was kind of accompanied with, to be completely transparent, passing blood. And I was like, this is not normal, obviously. And so it was kind of getting to the point where I was like ready to relocate and leave the city anyway. And I either had a choice of staying in London and getting different job because I was ready to move on from Harrods at this point, or biting the bullet, resigning, moving home and having a break and kind of rebalancing and sort of realigning my life and what I wanted to do and kind of put my health first. So I decided to resign and relocate back home. When I went back to the gynecologist, he was like, okay, well, sounds like you probably, I think he did a scan actually. And he was like, yeah, I think I can see some endo here. Whereas before, they couldn't see endo on the scan. They just thought I might have it. Because I always had that fertility thing in my mind, I was always like, because I know some people will say having operations isn't always going to help. For me, they always have helped. But I know that other chains of thought have been like they cause more scarring and inflammation. But for me, I think they've always helped. But I went ahead and had the operation again because I was very much aware that I'd never wanted to leave anything because I didn't want it to get worse and hinder my fertility. So I went back and I had the operation. This was in 2018. So I'd been home for a few months, went back to the doctor, had he put me back in for an operation. And this time they had found it in all the same places, but this time my fallopian tubes and my left hand colon were stuck together. So that's what was causing the problems with the pain and the cramps in the morning, because essentially my digestive tract just wasn't flowing properly. And that still came back despite being on the pill.
Mm.
So
Yeah, okay. And so this time, after that surgery, did you feel that how did it continue from there? Did you feel that you wanted to implement different things and try different avenues?
I think it was a bit more of a wake-up call. And I think the major thing, it wasn't like a complete lifestyle change again, but it was more, I was very more conscientious of work, and that kind of, I didn't need to work or overwork. That wasn't important. It was more my health was important, my quality of life was important. So I did end up spending the rest of the year off and kind of had like a kind of gap year, but just visited my friend in Canada. And then the following year, I tried to like work as a freelancer, had some contracts for like a rolling few months. And then I did decide to go back to full-time work, but obviously it was in a different environment. It was home, like it was from home, it wasn't in the city. It's for a sports company, kind of had a nice view over some nice hills. And I kind of was in my mindset of, well, I'm working for a company that's selling stuff to help people's lifestyle. That was the mentality. But I wasn't fully, I don't think I kind of had improved with some things, but I don't think I'd fully let go of the narrative of I need to work to prove myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I kind of, yeah, I hadn't fully broken the pattern, but had just become a bit more self-aware. But I had changed some things to help. And definitely since that second op and the relocation, like definitely did not have as much pain as I did while still living in London after the
Mm.
first one.
It's probably a wake-up call for a lot of people when they have health issues. I think it's such a beautiful thing that you realize about that what's more important is your health. And I think the fast-paced world of working and living in cities has an effect on most people. I think there's some people that can maybe continue on, but they might then have to take medications, or there's different issues going on in their body. And it's really beautiful that you realize that situation in London and everything was creating some more difficult symptoms, and that you
Yeah.
mm,
I think I do know some people who, I know a lot of people who feel the same way in the sense of they will continually work, but they know it causes health problems. But then I do know a lot of people who do thrive in that environment. But I personally have just never thrived in that environment. I think sometimes people's nervous systems are just a bit more regulated to perhaps withstand that. Or, I mean, down the line, they may end up having issues. But for me, it didn't work at all.
so you're now living in the southwest, and at this point, and you do that job, and you said you let go a little bit, but you were still holding on to the idea that you needed to work to have that validation. So when did that start to change or kind of break down?
So I started at that company 3 or 4 months before COVID hit, so the first lockdown. So I had 3 or 4 months of still going into work every day, like in the office, which was really, really hard. But the commute wasn't as long, and I was coming home. To this point, I had a dog, which was nice, and I was able to, go to the coast or be nearer nature on the weekend. So I had a bit of balance, bit more of a balance essentially, and I was able to kind of. The work was so when I was in London, the work was kind of like a daily deadline, and the work here was as long as you got it done within a week. It didn't really matter what day. So I had a that sort of more leeway and fluctuation. The stress level wasn't as high. And then it got to lockdown and we were able to completely work from home. And it was just like, obviously there was so much pain from COVID, but it was probably one of the best things that ever happened in my life in the sense of with bringing the freedom of working from home. As much as how much COVID brought pain for so many people, I think it did also show a lot of people the kind of the balance of versatility with being able to work from home, but also like quality time with family. And I think it made a lot of people think about what was important, I think, in life.
Mm. One thing that will always stand out for me of that time is how I remember with Venice, the waterways became clear and the fish returned, and old dolphins even, I think,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
how there were different things in nature, wasn't there, that kind of recovered in that time space of our slowness. And that makes me think that, we are also an animal body, we have a natural natural body and we live on the earth, and how just as the nature recovered in that time period of slowing down and us, it showed us not only where we might be affecting nature, but also that we also can thrive more with that level of giving more time to the people that love us, or to relaxation, or to our health. I feel like a lot of people in that time period of the lockdowns definitely reprioritized.
Yeah, I think it just brought so much like a better work-life balance for so many different people, which I think was positive in its own way, even though everything obviously wasn't positive about the whole experience. Most of the jobs now, I think, out there are still hybrid. I don't think majority of jobs have never gone back to fully in the office.
So what happened with that job?
So I actually was in that job until the end of last year, but me leaving that job was kind of part of last year's realignment. So we can get to that when we get to the realignment. But yeah, I was actually in that job to the end of last year. But I purely was in there for so long just for having some kind of stable income, because I was there for, say, we worked from home for about a year and a half, maybe just over, and then we went to like just 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. So it's still fairly majority from home. And even those days in the office were quite flexible. During that whole time, so many different so many different shops and holistic centers started doing all their workshops online. And I did so many online courses, and I just kind of like my world, even though we were isolated at home, my world just completely opened up, because everything that I didn't think was accessible or became accessible, so to speak. Also, just before the COVID lockdown hit, my nan passed away as well. And it was kind of around that time that I bought my first Oracle deck. And I remember pretty soon after my nan passing that I started having this kind of like feeling or need within me, and don't really understand it, to like want to use my hands. The way it kind of just synchronistically lined up, that then everything went online. I could do Reiki level 1 online. I learned the tarot on a course online. I learned about kind of cycle tracking and the fertility awareness method online.
So I just want to say about that, with the fact that you said your grandma passed away and you felt like using your hands, and that's something that you said earlier that your grandma felt like she wanted to do at some points as well. So do you feel like that when she passed, that was some sort of transmission, or?
100%, because there was never really interest in Reiki other than hearing about it from my nan and knowing about Reiki. I was no interest in doing it at all. Like that was just not interested in it. And I was just, but it was almost like this feeling of just wanting to it was like this feeling of wanting to put my hands on people. And I couldn't like quite explain why. And so through my exploration of different spiritual modalities, when Reiki popped up, I was like, I think I should do this, even though I'd never really been interested in it before.
Amazing. So you did the Reiki, you did tarot.
Yeah.
What was the other things you were saying?
Fertility awareness method. So when you learn to like cycle track with your BBM temperature, that was so eye opening. And then I also did a couple of shamanic womb courses. So like the first one kind of went through different archetypes and elements and how they relate to the womb. And then I did another one that connected with plant spirits and plant allies in relation to the womb. And I think that was the first time where, other than the Reiki level 1, that I connected to not only myself and like my womb space and my body, but I really felt like I connected to some kind of like higher power.
You were connecting through higher power through the shamanic womb course as well.
Yeah, because we were connecting with, so I think the 4 symbols from the first course, I remember definitely one was the moon and definitely one was chalice, the chalice. I think actually another one might be the serpent. And so through connecting to those symbols, we like explored why those symbols are related to the womb space. And then we'd kind of gone a shamanic journey or a meditation to explore those symbols. But by doing that, we were like journeying into our own wombs. And that was the first time I kind of could feel and experience my own womb as like a portal between like the earth and the cosmos, essentially.
Hmm.
It was the first time I kind of understood that I could listen to my body and my body could tell me signals and it could tell me I could follow my body and like my body knows best. So it was the first time I could tune in to my womb space and say, okay, actually it is guiding me. And how I could tune into like the creativity, essentially how like I could express from my womb space creatively. Yeah.
Mm. And so I'm sure that ties in with the work you did with the cycle tracking, working with the cycle and managing maybe or flowing with certain areas and times of the month in a particular way that maybe aids us and actually helps us on our spiritual growth and also our, like, life path.
Yeah, I think the first thing I felt so fascinated by with when I was cycle tracking was when you could like see when you actually ovulated, because even just since like we had sex education and biology at school, we were only really taught when kind of your period was, and that was like the main event. But it really stems back to ovulation. So to kind of actually see when you ovulate, I was like, this is literally fascinating. Like, how does not everyone know about this? You could just like really tune into your hormones, so you could understand. So, like the follicular start of your cycle, your spring phase, you can really sort of tune into that maiden archetype. And if you're feeling really excited, you kind of can have that visual representation of I understand why I'm excited and why it's a new time to start projects because I'm having this energy rise because my estrogen is starting to rise. And then, around summertime, around ovulation, and you're feeling like, oh, I just want to get with, you fancy every guy on the street, for example. Okay, that's because you just naturally want to mate, essentially. Have that kind of like connection to creativity and celebration and creation. And then when you go into kind of autumn phase, and you explore, like you were saying, about premenstrual, when perhaps a lot of the hysteria could come around. And I always see that time as, I think it's really good to take note of your triggers in that time, because I find that what's triggering you in that time usually is things that are out of balance. So it's your body's way of telling you on your next cycle, you need to kind of realign these areas. So I was always very conscious of the fact that my love life and my work life were always the biggest triggers in that time. So I always knew that there was always something along in there that was out of alignment in those areas to work on. And then going into winter, kind of in your bleed time, I always took it as like a real opportunity to rest, because I felt that I know I've still got some pain, but I felt that if I never really rested, then it kind of would affect the rest of my cycle. But what I find fascinating is like, I know we just talked about just the seasons of the cycle, but there's so many different ways you can explore it and how it lines up with the moon phases and different tarot archetypes as well, different goddesses. And have all these beautiful energies that we can embody and explore throughout our cycle as a way for learning and kind of self-development.
Yeah, and in a way, it's like we're reclaiming, at the beginning we were talking about how menstruality, is that? It's not a word. Menstruation and femininity has been portrayed in a certain way, especially with the periods on, and in a way, like with this work with the cycles and with tuning into the womb as being more than just an organ, it's like we're reclaiming those things that have been shut down. And like, isn't it interesting how now we think back to that excerpt in that piece of writing or the religious text where it's about women can't be close to their husband at that time of the month, and why would anyone need to maybe control a certain situation? Is usually that there's some element of power in there or something strong. And I feel that there's such wisdom that comes through with when you become a woman who attunes to that, and that also just innately during the period it's like such a powerful time. We're choosing now, yeah, and we're choosing now as a feminine, like, collective to reclaim those places where we've been denied and shut down within ourselves, and that's wisdom that we should be able to own for ourselves. This is something that happens in our body every month. We should have always had this. And so I'm interested how your journey with that, how did that start to affect your experiences with the endometriosis or just generally your
I
health?
think it definitely made me listen to my body and honor my body more. And I definitely think it asserted my boundaries. And I think also because at the time I wasn't suppressing symptoms. I actually could take more note on if I was having a flare up, or if I needed to eventually, a couple of years down the line. So last year, I went back to the doctor. I kind of was more aware of just everything and being kinder to myself, essentially. I think it helps a lot with self love because you're in tune with your body, and it connects you also more, I think, to the world around, because by understanding your cycle, you're connecting to the cycles of nature as well, because they're like mirrors. So it connects you to yourself and it connects you to everything around you.
Yeah, and you were saying about how you had the symbolism of the left side, about a lot of your symptoms were kind of on the left side. So how does that fit in?
Yeah. So the left side is connected to the woman, your woman side, feminine side, and also receiving. And your right side is connected to the masculine and often also giving out. So same way as different organs can relate to different things. So, for example, the liver is associated with anger, for example. The lungs and heart can obviously related to grief and heartbreak. And your organs and your sexual organs and your womb space obviously related to creativity and sexuality. But if you take that a step deeper, so if it's on the left hand side, it could relate to suppression of, not only is it perhaps an attack or suppression of your creativity and your sexuality, but particularly within the feminine. So it could be, are you allowing yourself to receive? Are you allowing yourself to express your femininity? It gives a good point, like a good way to explore the feminine relationships in your life as well. So particularly for the first two, well, even for the third operation, majority of the time, my endo has always been around the left-hand side. And I still think it's an ongoing process for me to fall back into my feminine, and allow my feminine and like intuition to lead, essentially.
Mm. I feel again that's such a cultural thing, isn't it? How we're talking about, and so the suppression of the feminine and the cycles is not just that. It's like a whole energy, isn't it? It's a suppression of being that energy of the feminine and what that might look like, you know. And obviously our culture is very geared towards money making and everything else. So I feel all these issues that we might have with our wombs and with those symptoms can show us how we have maybe denied those aspects. And obviously the vulnerability as well of softness, the vulnerability of softness and receiving, like you say, the receiving side of that also takes quite a lot of vulnerability and softness, which isn't necessarily the thing that we're told to portray in our society as well.
Yeah, yeah. I heard something really interesting once related to like the ancestral part, and how I think this is again this came I think this came from the shamanic teachings, and they were saying how actually if you've had perhaps a miscarriage in your ancestral line somewhere, or how far back, they see actually the endometriosis deposits as the spirit babies, because you haven't cleared your ancestral grief around it, which I thought was quite interesting.
There's definitely a link with the maternal line in our ancestry, isn't there, with all of these things, and
Mm.
how maybe a lot of us now are given these spaces to work to clear those lines and lineages, and how the womb, I feel like it contains memory, and also doesn't our, I can't remember exactly, I think that we are inside of our mother's womb while she's inside of her grandma's womb, because we're an egg at that point.
Yeah.
And so that memory itself that goes back and back, and then they have also had the same, and then the womb itself, I feel like, just carries this energetic memory and blueprint. And so this healing of
Yeah.
our physical creates or leads to this healing of the ancestral and the emotional and the energetic.
Mm. Yeah, and I do find that particularly interesting because my nan did lose a baby herself as well. Before she conceived my mum, she unfortunately fell down the stairs and lost a baby. So it's obviously subjective, but I do believe quite strongly that ancestral stuff can carry on down the line for you to explore if you're willing to.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely know that I've experienced those themes. And so how did your work with the more of the energetic practices kind of merge at this time?
So at that point, I still was very kind of into the shamanic broom stuff. And then the end of 2022, I started getting really bad pain again. And to the point that it wasn't just kind of related to it wasn't just in my period, it was a really bad ovulation. I think even ovulation was more painful, actually. I was like, I'm going to have to go back to the doctor because I'm not sure I can really cope with this anymore. I need to explore it. And they did another scan. And up to this point, I had done Reiki level 1, but I hadn't kind of probably deep dived into the rest of energetic stuff. And they explored and I had a scan, and they were like, yeah, I think you've got a cyst here, and I think this might be here, blah, blah, blah. I think this was like probably because it was the first time I'd been given the diagnosis of needing an op after doing the self-healing work I had already done the last couple of years. We've connected to my cycle and exploring the power of the womb. And obviously, because of my age, I was into my 30s now. And at this point, I wasn't really in a long-term relationship. I think this was probably the most heartbreaking time I got told, or experience I'd got told I needed an operation. Because I was like, I'd done all this work and I was like, is this just been for nothing? But then because I was feeling more, because I was more in tune with everything, despite going through those previous operations, I hadn't really felt the grief or the heartbreak of it.
Mm.
I look back now and I think my third operation was by far where there was most extensive endo. And I think what I believe is because I'd done all this healing, I was releasing all this energy, but I don't think I was really processing it properly because it was almost like everything I was releasing was manifesting as endometriosis because I'd gone on this healing journey, really intense healing journey, spiritual healing journey for like 2 years. And I think energetically, it was the worst because I'd done all this releasing, but I hadn't still manifesting like that. And it was when I was recovering from that operation that I had somebody post something about Seichim on Instagram, or maybe my teacher started following me on Instagram. And I was like, oh, what's this? And I started to explore it. And there was like loads of dots that connected together. And I was like, oh my God, I can't like not do this healing. So I recovered for a month, and then it was like a month later. And I was like, this is a sign. And the way it kind of connected was during one of the shamanic womb courses I've done, we got taken on a journey to meet some of our guides for the course. And obviously, when you take on a shamanic journey, the person guides you, but you will have your own individual experience about where you're taken and what you're shown. And in my kind of experience during that, I got taken to a desert with a camel. And I remember at the time being like, there was girls having like really ethereal experiences of it being in forests with fairies. And I was like, well, I'm in the desert with a camel. And this man and woman there, which what I believe to be Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, came up to me and they kind of did this anointing on me and gave me a rose and everything. And it really felt like it was the first time I probably felt like I connected with like a guide or some kind of energy in a journey before. And then when I was obviously exploring Seichim from that Instagram post, it actually comes from Egypt and it's connected to, so it's like the goddess Hathor and also Isis. And I think Kuan Yin's also connected to it as well. But essentially, it's like the goddess version or the feminine principle or side of Reiki. Traditional Reiki is quite masculine, whereas Seichim's connects to the divine mother. And the fact that it came from Egypt, because the guy who founded it, Patrick Ziegler, I think, he got all the symbols and the energy attunements while he was sleeping in the period of Giza. So it was almost, and obviously Mary Magdalene was was a temple priestess for Hathor and Isis. So I was like, even though those two experiences were like a year later, it kind of cemented my experience that that journey I had was leading to Seichim later on. But I only found Seichim because I went through that third operation.
Yeah, amazing synchronicity. You saw that it was linked to Egypt, and that was something that you really felt connected to.
Yeah. And so I signed up to the to the attunement day, and it was couple of months after my operation. And I just remember being like I mean, any energy attunement day is always magical, but it definitely like built up after that. So coming from the background I did, despite being around Christianity or the Church of England, I was kind of, because of my feelings around it as a child, I was resistant to it, resistant to certain aspects of biblical things. And I remember after the attunement, I started seeing Mother Mary like everywhere. And I was like, why am I seeing Mother Mary everywhere? Why do I feel really drawn to Mother Mary? No, like this is like, am I, is there, are they trying to, am I trying to like, does the universe want me to go Catholic? Like, I just didn't understand it. When you sort of move, like explore more of the mystery teachings, you realize you're not going, it's not a religious thing. It's just, you see them as the Divine Mother. And obviously, Mother Mary was also considered a priestess as well, same as Mother Anna, her mum. So yeah, so I started getting really connected to like this divine mother energy. I started just also after that getting really drawn to angels. And again, I was really resistant to angels. I was like, that's all love and light and feathers. And I was like, no, I'm into all this shamanic stuff. I don't want anything to do with angels. And in the end, I was like, I'm going to give in. I'm going to buy an angel deck and just see what happens. I think this was around the time actually over the summer, I did kind of a Seichim level 2 course online where we explored a different Egyptian god or goddess. So it was kind of like building on like the attunement. And I ordered an angel deck. And I remember, I mean, I bought so many different oracle decks in the past, but I remember this energy was so strong with this one deck that I opened. I just felt so deeply connected to it, more than a lot of other decks that I've ever bought. And then it just kind of got stronger and stronger, and I would start, I just intuitively would just felt like I was talking to the angels all the time, and I was receiving signs in like synchronicities in nature. Like I remember I was talking to them once in the garden with my dog at night, and then would see a shooting star, and it was like, okay, this is something I need to explore really. So that's kind of why I then became quite drawn to angelic Reiki. And kind of the other aspect that was quite life changing last year as well was kind of went from operation to Seichim and then Seichim over the summer. And then I went on my first pilgrimage in end of September last year to Bucharest in France, which is where the Magdalenes and Mary Magdalene were supposed to have come after the not the resurrection, yeah, the crucifixion and resurrection of Yeshua. So they obviously escaped persecution and they came to the lands of France. And the places we visited were kind of all the fountains, the caves that they were supposed to have lived out their days. And I just think that was super activating, super life changing and activating in so many different ways. And I remember over the pilgrimages with my shamanic womb teacher, and she said, once you come to these lands, like your life will change. And I was like, okay, I don't know, something majorly shifted then. And then 2 weeks back, I got made redundant from my job.
2 weeks back, as in from now?
From France.
From France. Wow. Yeah, so it feels like this whole journey that you've been on, with the connection that has been from first with this exploration of the womb, and then how that's drawn you naturally to this healing, which is more about the divine feminine and the goddess and that energy, and how beautiful that those archetypes, they would be. You can see them as the gatekeepers of feminine health, because they're like the feminine empowerment, and how all these things are really beautifully linked on this journey of just becoming back to woman, really whole woman, I guess.
I think also with the Magdalenes as well. I mean, one of their greatest teachings was sacred union. So sacred union of masculine and feminine, but also sacred union of your soul and your human bodies, like matter and spirit. And if I had never been made redundant from that job, as a job that obviously I'd stayed in for, outstayed my welcome. I'd wanted to leave for a long time, really, was just staying for convenience. I wasn't the only person who did lose my job at that time, but if I hadn't have lost my job at that time, I actually wouldn't have been able to make the angelic Reiki training that I did in December last year.
Yeah, amazing. And so when you have now been starting to explore this journey with the spirits and those realms. How do you feel like that links back to when you were a child and you said that there was a part of you that was missing?
Yeah, so I feel like now this, but first of all, like the spiritual journey that I've been on in the last few years has allowed me to explore so many different aspects of things. So obviously I mentioned some of the courses I was doing, but within that I was able to explore revisiting like childhood trauma or buried trauma. Obviously anything spiritual or can also support you with your mental health. And I think, like in hindsight, first off, when I look back, there were so many signs there that were constantly pulling me back to this path. But it wasn't until I look back that I spotted them. And at the time, I just had blinkers on. Actually, when I was doing my postgrad at the London College of Fashion, and I chose to do like a series of articles as if it was for a magazine. And one of the articles I actually wrote was on psychism versus science. So I like interviewed a psychic, I interviewed like a scientist, and I interviewed people who had like bad and good experiences of seeing psychics. And then I remember when I was in London as well, I had like these two quite profound experiences with butterflies. I was leaving a meeting in the middle of Knightsbridge, London, central London, really busy. Not, you don't really see many animals around there. And so it's like pigeons, for example. And I was leaving this meeting and I had my fedora in my hand. And this butterfly came and sat in my fedora and it wouldn't leave. And I was like, obviously looking back now, I'm like, I kind of am quite connected to like winged beings anyway. So birds, butterflies. And so I do see birds and butterflies as animal guides. I didn't realize that at the time, but looking back now, I'm like, it was definitely a sign to show that there was something there trying to draw me to something. And then there was another time when I was on the tube and we were underground and it was a really busy packed tube. So I have no idea how this butterfly got there, but there was a butterfly like, flying around me on the tube and then just disappeared. But again, I just didn't know, I didn't think about it at the time. But there's all these things that are kind of like, from being a little girl and being interested into all the witchy stuff to, wanting to write about psychics at uni to having these experiences with the butterflies in London, kind of was a bit drawn to crystals occasionally if I was having a breakup, for example. But it was almost like endometriosis was like the wake up call to not just heal myself, but kind of like realign me because I was missing all these signs that were constantly coming up for me. But had I not gone through that endometriosis process, I don't think I necessarily would ever have gone back to the spiritual path.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It reminds me of this quote that says something like, the universe will speak in whispers until if you're not listening, it will start to shout, And I definitely have had that
Yeah, I
experience
do
in
resonate
my
with that.
yeah, I've definitely had that experience in my journey of there's this, and then it's like, nope, okay, let's try again. No, okay, and then it gets to this point where it's like you can't not see it, and I feel it shows that to me it seems that there's always in life for everyone there's this potential to become more of ourselves, to become a more like complete or whole or connected being, and there's just how sensitive are we to the signs or how willing are we to change. And for some people it has to take something quite like strong to jolt us out of this conditioned reality.
Mm,
So sometimes it's like,
yeah.
although these things are so painful, they become a blessing. Hey.
Yeah, no, I agree. Obviously, I've had to go through the challenges of having endometriosis, but like I just said, like I wouldn't have gone on the spiritual path I did go down if I hadn't tried to heal my illness or disease, I wouldn't call it. But also in turn for that, if I hadn't have gone down that spiritual path, I would never have healed like my heart and my soul, essentially. That feeling of belonging, lacking of belonging, or that feeling of loneliness, or that void that I had growing up and all in throughout my 20s. Like I don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I just remembered when you were saying earlier how you went on a retreat, and that felt like that was a cracking open of this shell, and that's helped you work out what the void was, so that now, yeah, I don't know if you feel like going into that a little bit,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, so I feel like there's quite a lot of synchronicities actually in the last few years with three. So obviously three endometriosis ops, three retreats that I went on. First retreat I went on was a couple of years ago now, maybe 3 years actually. It was just when things were going back to normal after COVID, and that was like a wild women's retreat. Then last year I went on a shamanic womb mystery retreat, and then the third one was the pilgrimage retreat in France. And so I very much see it as cracked open, bud, bloom. So like the first one was kind of like cracking my reality and shaking me up and being like, wake up, and releasing all this conditioning and what I thought knew, and like raising the veils and, filtering out all these illusions and things. I think it was the first time as well that I cried in front of people, because we had these like women's circles, and I'd had like online women's circles, but it wasn't quite the same. And these other women were talking, and it's like, this is what I find so magical about women's circles anyway. You resonate with each other. And these women were saying these things, and I was like, oh my God, that's how I feel. But I've never realized I felt like that. And I just think I spent most of the weekend crying, to be honest. And then I came back, and I remember my mum was like, well, how is it? Like, going to tell me how it went and everything. And I just couldn't stop crying. But by the time I got home, it wasn't like sad tears. It was like happy tears, because it was like I was almost releasing everything that I'd kind of kept in. And there was just such a big shift in reality,
Mm.
essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so amazing how, like we were saying with this feminine collective, that so much of our story is the same. So many of our journeys are so similar, and we are reclaiming as a whole these ideas, and how in a lot of generations before us we wouldn't get together and speak about these things, and how, yeah, it's amazing how we've gone so long, really. It's the same with men's circles that are now happening. But we realize that we're with this shared humanity, whereas in the past, we might have been in tribal situations where that was just normal. You couldn't escape the reality that we're all having similar experiences. And so it's so amazing now, like you say, when you're in circles, the amount of people feeling the same things, and that you set each other off in a way as well when you're in a shared group, because we are all sharing energy and experience. And yeah, so beautiful.
I think also just, yeah, I mean, like hundred years ago, we would be in tribes, and we would have that community. Obviously, you do get some community aspects of things in modern life. If you go to church regularly, for example, I know that can be a bit of community, but day to day, community is not necessarily a major, we're not taught necessarily to be in community. And I think I read this really good, interesting story once, where there was like some tribe of women somewhere, and they had a rise in mental health issues when they had washing machines put in their village, because they used to go and wash the clothes together and chat and communicate in the river or by the river. And so then that kind of technology coming into the village, they didn't have that community and that chance to share and talk to each other, which I find really interesting, because we're so separate now in society. And we have friends and family, we might have some kind of connection with a community, but we're still so separate.
Yeah, I'm really happy that things seem to be returning to a bit more of those roots of the connection and community, and everyone's really embracing. A lot of us are embracing that idea of that community and sharing circles and stuff. So I'm aware that we're getting on to 2 hours. So what's there that you feel like you want to wrap up in this sense? And where do you find yourself now with your experience of endometriosis, and someone with living with that, and also with this connection with more of these holistic and spiritual practices? And
Yeah, so where I am now is finally, essentially, in the last few months, I found the confidence to kind of start offering these trainings that I've been working on, kind of as part of my personal spiritual exploration, but like at a point where I feel like I'm now can offer them to help other women. So that ranges from energy healing to ceremonies, and also kind of combined my writing experience with energy and freelance work. One thing I wanted to mention was that there's so many different layers to healing, and I think every single one of them does have their place. So I know a lot of people who say, operations have caused more problems. I personally think they've always helped me. I still think medical has a place. Same way is, if you're informed and you want to be on contraception, that's fine as long as you're informed. But I still think it's important to explore different avenues as well, because I don't think I ever really had any proper respite or improvement until I started to explore the spiritual aspects of things. So obviously we mentioned some of the holistic things I did anyway, so like shamanic room stuff, diet, physio, changing beauty regime and stuff. But also I think exploring the mind a bit as well as like exploring your dreams and what your subconscious is telling you. I had a course on hypnotherapy, and that was really helpful. That really helped me unpack a lot of my buried limiting beliefs and fears, and helped me deal with a lot of trauma that I'd suppressed. And there's a really good book by Louise Hay called How to Heal Life. And she talks a lot about affirmations in that. And I think affirmations is a really good thing as well. Because I also feel that this is my personal feelings. It's not necessarily the truth for everyone or reality, but they don't say endometriosis is an autoimmune condition. But with its way of attacking itself, I consider it as like a attack on the self. And spiritually, like, to me, that translate as if you have low self-worth and self-confidence, it's your body's physical manifestation of your low self-worth. So I think exploring things like hypnotherapy can help with improving your self-worth and confidence as well. And then I think the final piece of the puzzle is kind of exploring the more spiritual aspects as well, because if you don't feel so alone and isolated, and you are feeling like connected with everyone, you know, the feeling of the connection with unconditional love, universal oneness, source, spirit, God, goddess, whatever your name is attached to it, it kind of just makes everything make sense. You know, you feel like you have a spiritual support system essentially. So I do think it's threefold. Somatics is another thing, that's another area that's always interesting to explore, because that helps with like releasing, you know, buried emotions. Past life healing is another avenue to explore as well. But yeah, I just feel like, I think particularly with the energy aspect, by connecting to your own energy system, you're kind of like clearing stuff before it physically manifests. But then also for me, when I'm tuning into kind of those energies, I'm connecting into that universal life force energy. So I'm sort of supporting others in clearing their energy, but it's also healing for me.
Yeah, I think it's so important to cover all bases when we're healing, you know, looking at the body, looking at the mind, like you say, looking at the soul. And ultimately I feel that, you know, maybe our health conditions are this manifestation of some things that are needing to be, you know, addressed internally, like you say. So the
Yeah.
way it's our body intelligently pointing us towards something. So I really liked what you said about the going into the mind and with unlocking these places that are obviously in some way have been stagnating our energy, so that our body has had to create some sort of a medical situation. We're clearing, aren't we? It's so interesting that we come into this life, and sometimes it can start so early that we wonder what we're clearing, but like we say, that it links to the ancestors there, it can link to our own personal childhood too, and all of those things that we pick up at the beginning of our life around beliefs and our stories, and then that what you're saying about that spiritual connection and not feeling alone, you know, that's a massive thing for me when I had that level of connection, where I could feel that there were other energies supporting me in my life, and the larger archetypal energies as well, like the mother and the father on a big scale. It really like helps us to feel that we have more of a place on this planet, isn't it? You know, more of a home. You know, some of us feel like we've been kind of taken from our home when we come onto this planet, but I feel that we can reclaim that whilst we are in physical body. And it is, yeah, this beautiful thing about that we're all here communally, and we're learning how to like untangle the things that separate us on all levels. I feel that we're kind of at a nice place to
Hmm.
complete. Do you feel complete in that way?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to
I
mm,
think just lastly, a few other things that I've found supportive with endometriosis healing as well are holistic things to explore. So, like you mentioned, massage. I think definitely there's ways you can self massage, and there's also obviously loads of fertility practitioners, probably local, that you could research to find that can support that. Definitely exploring like herbal allies, so seeing a herbalist maybe, things like yoni steaming and castor packs as well. Like these are just kind of holistic things that I've found supportive of my cycle that is definitely worth looking into as well.
Yeah, beautiful. And do you want to take a second to share about your business and where we can find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Divinely Soulful or on my website at www.divinelysoulful.com. And I offer Seichim Healing and Angelic Reiki both in person and online, as well as ceremonies. So things like we were talking about the menarche ceremonies, baby blessing ways. I also offer just energy cleansing ceremonies if perhaps you didn't want like a full energy healing. There's also something that I've started to offer called like a post-op TLC. So to help sort of support you in the heartbreak and grief and recovering from operation, like on an energetic level, womb connection, heart healing. And then with my writing experience, I offer freelance writing work still as well, but try and connect it to energy and ceremony work as well.
Sounds so beautiful, and thanks so much for joining. And it's been really, really beautiful to get to know you and to have this talk with you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thanks for being my first guest.
Thank you. A privilege.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. And as I said in my introduction, I'm going to be doing a guided meditation at the end of every episode, inspired by the imagery from our conversation. So if you'd like to join me, take a moment to just close your eyes, come into your center, take some deep breaths. And we're going to take a moment to send love to our bodies, where we often might forget to do that when we're suffering from pain or illness. So on the in-breath, I'd like you to imagine white light coming down from the center of your head, coming through your body and moving to any place within your body where you suffer any pain or illness. This could be organs, joints, cells, skin, eyes. So with the in-breath, you're bringing the energy down to that place, and with the out-breath, you're spreading and radiating the energy to that place. With the in-breath, bringing the energy down through the top of your head and through your body, sending it to the place where you need it. With the out-breath, radiating that energy to the place and through all the cells in the area. In-breath and out-breath. And as we do this, I'd like you to take a moment to acknowledge all the work that your body does for you, everything that it's capable of and that it gives you every moment and every day. I'd like you to imagine sending love to the places within you that you suffer discomfort in or pain. Remembering to give love to the place and sending joy. In breath, bringing energy down through your head, down to the place. Out breath, spreading the energy through that place and sending love and smiles to the area. And you can carry on with that for as long as you like. Thanks so much for joining and listening, and I'll see you next episode.